There's currency at being the best at something, at standing out and standing above your competitors. This is as true for pubs as it is for people. Many pubs vie to be the longest, the smallest, or the highest pubs in the country. Today we're going to explore the places that do battle to be named the oldest pubs in Dublin and Ireland. Welcome to Publin, a podcast about the culture, history and heritage of pubs at home and abroad. Scanning the title of this podcast, you might think that you know all there is to know already about the oldest pub in the country. But there's a little more to the story than a straight awarding of accolades. A number of pubs in Dublin and Ireland have laid claim to these titles, muddying the waters somewhat and ensuring that there is at least a little bit of a contest. We'll give you a few of the challengers to the title and lay out their claims, allowing you to make up your mind as to who is the winner. The custom of public houses and coach houses in Ireland can be dated back in some form to approximately 600 AD, with sources from the time stating that it was part of the law that local kings would be required to have a hostelry open to travellers at all times, where the food and drink was free. Naturally, these locations served beer or mead, so they could be said to be the equivalent function to the modern pub. So that's how far back we know that these proto-pubs existed. But how far back and how close can one pub get to 600 AD? This is where the criteria comes in, and depending on which pub you ask, it can get a bit mixed. Some pubs rely on archaeological material to show that their pub exists on the site of what was once also a pub, coach house or Brithen hostel, while others make their claim on being able to prove an unbroken licence to a very determined date in time. Today we're concerned with pubs who make a claim on a specific date that puts them in the mix, or have boldly made the declaration to be the oldest pub in Dublin or Ireland. First up is a pub that makes a claim through its signage to being the oldest pub in Dublin. It's unfortunately no longer trading and is in a very sorry state of dereliction. Conway's on Parnell Street is a well-known site, first because of its central location and reputation as being the place you might go to celebrate a birth across the road in the Rotunda Hospital, and more recently as a site that has been allowed to rot. The signage of the pub still bears the name Patrick Conway, the owner who passed away in 1967, and underneath that is writing that claims the pub to be the oldest in Dublin, having opened in 1745. The pub must have done a good trade in its day, considering that a newspaper reported that Mr. Conway left £150,000 in his will in 1967, a considerable sum when inflation is taken into account. The National Inventory of National Heritage estimates that the building itself was constructed in 1880 or thereabouts, and this does leave the possibility that another pub existed on the same site prior to that. However, the adverts for the pub's sale from 1999 to 2002 referred to it as the oldest pub in the North City, seemingly dropping the claim to be the oldest in all of Dublin. One thing that might account for the dropping of this claim is the existence of another pub that gets mentioned later on in this podcast on the south banks of the Liffey that lays a stronger claim. Our personal verdict, with minimal evidence, is that Conway's claim doesn't seem to hold up, especially since previous owners or the auctioneers didn't seem to have faith in it. Moving on to our next candidate. The Wren's Nest is situated on the banks of the Liffey, about 10 kilometres outside the Dublin city centre. It's located in an area known as the Strawberry Beds, along a road that would have been a main artery towards the city for hundreds of years before being relegated to a minor road in recent times. As the name might suggest, it's a small pub, but it has indeed stood the test of time and has a strong lineage. The same family has owned and operated the pub since 1800, but it's a bit farther back in history that the pub claims to be able to trace its roots. I'll read now from the pub's website. Not much is known about the early history of the Wren's Nest, but we know it goes back a long way and is probably the oldest pub in County Dublin. It has been in the present family for 5 generations, going back to the early 1800s. Hughie Ennis, who was a great-uncle of the present proprietors, always maintained that the Wren was as old as Trinity College, Dublin. Trinity was founded in 1592 by Queen Elizabeth I. In 1975, during renovation work, it was necessary to remove a pitch pine beam in one of the main walls of the house. It bore the date 1588 carved with an auger. A section of that old beam is preserved and can be viewed in the tap room. That's some pretty good evidence there. If it could be confirmed by archaeologists, then they might have a decent case. So the claim made here is that the pub is the oldest in County Dublin, so that would presumably exclude the city. It sounds like a good claim to being up there when it comes to Dublin, and indeed all of Ireland. We move outside of Dublin for our next claim, but it's hard to find any mention of it online, save for in a newspaper article in the Irish press in 1967. In the article, the claim was made by the then proprietor that Becky Kelly's pub in Ruan, County Clare, was the oldest pub in Ireland. In the article, which is about fly-on-the-wall experiences by a columnist called Onlooker, one of the people concerned asked Becky Kelly how old the pub was. The article continues, "The gentle lady behind the bar returned his lingering look, and then switched her eyes to mine. I'm the 8th, or is it 9th generation? It's more than 400 years, I suppose." It's in the caption of the photograph of Rebecca Kelly and Michael O'Loughlin that the actual claim is made. 400 years before 1967 is 1567. Other than the claim made in this article and the passing down of the oral family history, we can't verify or deny this claim, but we also can't find any mention online of whether the claim is still being used today. These days, the pub is called Morty Kelly's, which would suggest that the pub is still in the hands of the same family. Could this be the longest unbroken link of one pub staying in the same family? We'd be indebted to anyone from this area who maybe has visited the pub who could shed any light on how old the pub is or claims to be. That might deserve an episode of its own. As we can't find any further information at the moment, we'll move on in the hunt. Another pub with somewhat sparse information about its claim to be the oldest pub in Ireland is Grace Neal's in County Down. The pub is located in the port town of Donaghadee, around 30 kilometres from Belfast. Now, we say that the evidence is sparse, but rather it's the presented evidence online that is sparse. There could be a wealth of contributing documentation out there, but we're finding it hard to locate. The pub is named after its one-time owner, Grace Neal, who was given the pub as a wedding present by her father in 1842. The pub remained under her stewardship until her death at the age of 99 in 1916. Prior to Grace's ownership of the pub, it was known as the King's Arms and is reputed to have first been licensed or built in 1611. One of the interesting myths about the pub is that it was once visited by Tsar of Russia Peter the Great in the late 17th century while he was on an incognito fact-finding trip to Western Europe. So far we've had 1592, 1567 and 1611. That's quite old. But the claims from our next two pubs put these ones to shame. That is, of course, if they're able to back them up. If you were to ask the average Dubliner what the oldest pub in Ireland was, it's likely they'd give you the name of our next pub. They'd know it because they'd seen it 100 times on signage, on TV programmes and tourist brochures. It is, of course, the Brazen Head on Lower Bridge Street. This pub, on their signage outside, claims to be the oldest pub in Ireland, and they definitely benefit from a huge boost in trade from this fact, or claim. There is no doubt that the Brazen Head is a well-known pub going back hundreds of years in Dublin. It's mentioned by Joyce in Ulysses, and there are many, many verifiable references to it in other works of fiction and in the historical record. What is questionable is just exactly how far back we can date it. The claim is that a pub or hostelry can be traced back to this site since 1198. That's 825 years of people getting intoxicated on this site. Indeed, it's very close to the original Viking settlement of Dublin, and the site and surrounding area was certainly used as a settlement. When I mentioned earlier that Conway's pub had changed its claim from all of Dublin to just the North City, it was in deference to this pub. In terms of verifiable documentation, the pub has an ample amount. It's just a matter of how far back that can bring you. And in fairness, the Dublin of 1198 wasn't likely to have issued licenses for its taverns or kept records for posterity. A signature found etched on a window in the pub was confirmed to be from 1726 and holds the accolade of being the oldest piece of graffiti in Ireland. There's one title confirmed anyway. The graffiti has to be read with the magnifying glass and reads, "John Langan halted here, 7th of August, 1726. I wonder, could his ancestors be tracked down and brought in to pay for damages, or at least have them in to have a pint in the memory of their ancestor? 50 years previous to that is a licence from the bar from 1668. We're moving backwards further in time in making a stronger claim. The ultimate documentary proof of the age of the pub is a court certificate of ownership from 1613 stating that the pub was owned by Richard and Eleanor Fagan at the time. So what is the origin of the name of the pub? Kevin Martin's book, The Complete Guide to the Best Pubs in Dublin, has a fair explanation of it. One suggests that a stray canon removed the head of a well-known red-haired girl of ill repute during the Williamite Wars of 1689 to 1691. According to the narrative, she had been watching the nearby skirmish from the window of her brothel when the misfortune befell her. When the new tavern was built on the location in 1750, it was called the Sign of the Brazen Head. So far, the Brazen Head probably has the best documentary evidence to support its claim, at least up to 1613. Further than that requires a bit of extrapolation. The pub's owners were so confident in their claim, though, that they agreed to a radio discussion between themselves and another pub to put the evidence to the test. The late Jerry Ryan hosted the debate on RTE Radio between the Brazen Head of Dublin and Sean's Bar of Athlone. Sean's Bar makes a claim bolder and further back than all other pubs in Ireland, stating that they can prove that the pub dates back to the year 900 AD. And prove it they did, with the assistance of archaeologists and historians from the National Museum. In the 1970s, renovations were carried out on the pub, where part of the wall was removed and studied, and found to be made of wattle and daub. The materials were dated back to 900 AD. Other supporting evidence was also found, including coins made by local landlords that may have been used as beer tokens. The current structure was built in 1725, and was likely constructed on top of and using material from previous structures on the site. The removed wall and coinage are now housed and displayed in the National Museum of Ireland, giving professional credibility to Sean's claim to the throne. One remaining excavated wall remains in the pub and is on protected display. On this radio debate, the Brazen Head apparently conceded the wealth of information pointing towards Sean's Bar being the oldest. The pub was also in 2004 presented with the accolade of Ireland's oldest pub by the Guinness Book of Records. Sean's also makes a claim that it may well be the oldest pub in the world, beating out the Bingley Arms in Leeds dating to 953 and Ye Old Trip to Jerusalem in Nottingham that dates to 1189 AD when the Crusades were happening, hence the name. It's fair to say that there's a clear victor when it comes to the oldest bar in Ireland, but there's other accolades to go around. Oldest in Dublin, oldest in North Dublin City, oldest in Dublin County, oldest in Clare, oldest in Northern Ireland, and so on. There's also the criteria to consider. Does it count if there was a pub on the site at one point or another? Does it have to be the same building continuously? Or are we talking about the longest licensed pub? The next time you hear a pub quiz question asking you what the oldest pub in Ireland is, you might have to write down Sean's Bar. But it's complicated. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Publin Podcast. I'd be very interested to hear of any other pubs you've come across with a long lineage, or even what the oldest pub is in a given county. I'm also going to do future episodes on the highest, longest, and smallest pubs in Ireland, so continue to subscribe for those ones. As always, a rating or sharing the podcast with a friend would be of great help. If you want to get in touch, you can email me, John, via publinie@gmail.com. Thanks again, and sláinte.